What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer here with you in the evening hours of Saturday, June 22nd, 2024. How about the outburst from the St. Louis Cardinals on Saturday? They got the off day on Friday to travel back to St. Louis from Birmingham. I did the same, but then turned around Friday night, and I'm actually in Evansville, Indiana this weekend with my wife and son for a little weekend trip. But I watched from afar, and the Cardinals offense got it done on Saturday. The explosion of power output led by Alec Burleson, who now is up to 12 home runs on the season. He was the star of the show today for the Cardinals, going 3 for 4 with a pair of home runs, 5 RBIs, 3 runs scored, also reached base via walk. So he's got the OPS up to 784 now with a 281 batting average. And I know the voting was what we said it was about a week ago or so, that he was 10th among National League designated hitters in the All-Star voting. But, I mean, another game or two like this, and Alec Burleson would have a really good case to be on that All-Star team, even if he's not voted in, which is something that I don't think many people were thinking about him when the season began. Honestly, with the way that the Cardinals were adding left-handed hitting bench bats in spring training, first Matt Carpenter came, I believe, a little before spring training is when that signing happened, if I can recall correctly. But then obviously Brandon Crawford. And the day Crawford was signed, I mean, the consensus seemed to be, look, at full health, this Cardinals team doesn't have any room on its bench, even on the roster for Alec Burleson. And now he's unequivocally performing as one of the team's best hitters. So he did his job in a 9-4 win this afternoon for the Cardinals in a game where the Cardinals faced off against Jordan Hicks. Right, that was a big storyline coming into this game, is how would Hicks perform back in St. Louis for the first time since pitching for the Cardinals, and doing so now in a different role than the one he saw the majority of the time when he was in St. Louis. He's been thriving as a starting pitcher for the Giants this season. He did not thrive today, as I don't know if it was nerves or what it was that maybe caused some slight issues with the command for Hicks being back at Busch Stadium. But he only goes 4 innings, gives up 5 runs, all of them earned. 2 home runs allowed. He also hit a batter and walked 3 in this game. So that was a bit of where the command issues came in for Hicks. But the Cardinals, to their credit offensively, were able to get to Jordan Hicks. They were able to get to this San Francisco bullpen, a couple of different relievers, and they win this one 9-4, getting back above 500, feeling pretty good about things, and a chance to have that home sweep over the Giants if they can get it done on Sunday. And it's Sonny Gray pitching. So the Cardinals have really set themselves up nicely by the way they have performed over the first couple of games in this series. Obviously, the Rickwood Field game on Thursday in Birmingham, a little bit unusual to get a day off in the middle of a series, but they get the rest and recuperation they needed on Friday. And then finally, I think this was an example of that concept we have talked a lot about this season, but haven't seen much of in practice, which is the Cardinal offense barraging the other side to the extent that it allows the bullpen to take a little bit of the heat off. Now, you still did see Jojo Romero. You still did see Ryan Fernandez, who has really kind of elevated himself into that tier of elite leverage relievers, has a 2.48 ERA after the 4 outs he recorded today without allowing a run. And so, yeah, you did see a couple of the marquee setup guys have to pitch in this game, but you didn't need to go to Helsley and you didn't need to go to Andrew Kittredge. So you can call that a win, I think, on both counts after those guys pitched on Thursday in Birmingham. So you feel good about the Cardinal offense finally doing its job in a game where the pitching staff did as well, because you could make the case that what the Cardinals did in that game that Lance Lynn pitched last week, or earlier this week, rather, against the Miami Marlins, the offense had that sort of game, at least at the beginning, where they put up a bunch of runs, but then Lynn was not able to do his part in order to keep that game intact with a jumbo-sized lead, and the Cardinals had to eventually use their entire bullpen to try to make a go of winning that game. So this was a different sort of example as the Cardinals, and they didn't even win that one in the end. That was one of the extra innings games, and they lost that one to Miami. But in this case, Miles Mikolas did his job going 6 innings, keeping the Cardinals in this one. Really, if you look at the numbers, one of Miles' worst starts that he's had since April, really. Again, I keep touting back to April 26th when I talk about Miles Mikolas, because that was the beginning of a run for him where really prior to today, every start other than one since April 26th was at least a quality start, or it was better in some ways because he might have gone fewer innings, but also allowed fewer than the 3 requisite runs. And in this game, he goes 6, but allows 4. So doesn't qualify for a quality start, but still, under the circumstances, I think gave the Cardinals exactly what they needed. And that's good to see, too, because this game didn't start out that way for Miles Mikolas. He got into trouble out of the gate and allowed 3 runs there in that first inning, but was able to settle in over his next 5, allowing just 1 run in innings 2 through 6, and the Cardinals win it 9-4 as the bullpen comes on and does a clean job with JoJo, with Ryan Fernandez, and then Kyle Leahy, who's now got his ERA down below 4. So those are the topics of the day. We'll talk about a lot of injury-related topics as well, kind of focusing on aspects of the catching situation with Ivan Herrera going on the IL. Bad news for Steven Matz, and what does that mean for the Cardinals' present and future plans in the rotation? And another scare for Nolan Arenado that I don't know that we're out of the woods on yet. So we will touch on that as well on this episode of B-Schaeff Daily. And I probably should have mentioned this before 7 minutes into the podcast, but I do apologize for the audio quality. As I mentioned, out of town this weekend, and so we don't have the normal setup. I do plan to try to get a decent USB mic to where I don't have to bring my entire radio setup with me on the road to be able to still do the podcast. And quick apology, too, for those who were looking for something on the off day. I usually try to put up something different, something offbeat for Cardinal off days to where we still have a podcast. But yesterday was literally me driving 8 hours back to St. Louis on Friday during the day, and then turning around with my wife and son and getting in the car to go to Evansville, Indiana that night. And something to hopefully look forward to. I am on Sunday going to try to go on over to Bosse Field. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Bosse Field. After the Rickwood Field game, I put up a TikTok that has gotten a ton of views. Maybe it'll allow me to get enough subscribers to my TikTok that I can start doing MLB The Show live streaming over there, because I think you have to have 1,000 followers. Anyway, a TikTok from Rickwood Field, and it started getting me thinking about some of these other historic venues. And it just so happens that Evansville, Indiana has one, another of the very few remaining Negro League stadiums. That's Bosse Field. Bosse. I should probably have looked up the pronunciation. Anyway, the Evansville Otters play there of the Frontier League. Used to be the River City Rascals were in the same league there. Is got the stadium right outside my neighborhood in O'Fallon. So that's something that we're hopefully going to be able to check out, and maybe I can post a little bit of content from there on Sunday, because I just would like to check out another historic venue after getting to see Rickwood earlier this week. There's another one that I just happened to be in the same town as this weekend. So hoping to check that out too. But if you enjoy Cardinals content, that's primarily what we do here on the YouTube channel and the Spotify B-Schaeff Daily feed. So make sure to subscribe and follow on those avenues if you want Cardinals content all season long and all year long as well, as we'll continue to hit things hard in the off season. And if you do that, you'll usually almost always hear better audio quality than what I'm bringing you tonight. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into the content of the show as we break down this Cardinals game and then get into some of the injury aspects as well, because the Cardinals are still dealing with quite a few, and that list grew a little bit today on Saturday. But when I start off talking about this game, I think Jordan Hicks is one of the biggest storylines, because coming into this one, it felt as though there might be another dominant type of performance the way that Jack Flaherty gave when the Tigers faced the Cardinals earlier this season, because Jordan Hicks probably had that chip on his shoulder a little bit, right? Like, he wanted to stay a Cardinal. Back at that trade deadline time last July, the reporting was going around that, hey, there might be a last-minute opportunity here and an attempt being made between the Cardinals and Jordan Hicks, whoever was leading the charge on that, but to maybe get an extension together rather than need to trade him, because the whole notion of trading Jordan Hicks and guys like Jordan Montgomery and Jack Flaherty was primarily because we knew that those guys didn't have contracts and that they were expiring assets from a business angle in Major League Baseball. And so it just made sense for the Cardinals, who were not competing for the playoffs at that point last summer, to get whatever they could for those guys. And that's ultimately what they did with all 3 of those pitchers. And, remains to be seen whether any of the pieces the Cardinals got in those deals really will have major long-term ramifications. John King already has done a nice job for the Cardinal bullpen. He came over in one of those trades, so that's nice. But the others were primarily prospects, and we haven't really seen the impact yet of any of those guys really, but remains to be seen. But at this point, Jordan Hicks has moved on to the Giants. He's got a 4-year contract worth $44 million, which I think, whether or not the Cardinals would have been willing to give him something in that arena, who knows? But the reality is it could be a bargain for the Giants based on the role that they're using him in as a starting pitcher, thinking outside the box. Look, the Cardinals are paying Steven Matz 4 years, $44 million. I think that's the exact same contract that Matz signed. And believe me, we're going to get into some Steven Matz talk today because it's not going well in terms of the setback that he just had. Yeah, 4 years, 44 for Matz. So it's a savvy contract by the Giants, but this was the first time that we got a chance to see Hicks in this role back at Busch Stadium, taking on the Cardinals. And unequivocally, the Cardinals got the dub in this matchup. Like, when they faced Jack Flaherty, it was not pretty. He absolutely dominated the Cardinals, but this was not the same for Jordan Hicks. As the Cardinals get a couple of home runs off of him, 2 homers in the game. He had an inning where he just loaded the bases via walks and hit by pitch, couldn't figure out a way to stop giving away those free bases, and allowed a number of hits, got the pitch count run up, 88 pitches over 4. It's really interesting that the Cardinals were able to do that against Hicks, but when it came to Jack Flaherty, they were completely flummoxed, completely lost with how to approach him, it seemed. And now Jack's stuff was really good that day when he took on the Cardinals. But nevertheless, Cardinals got it going early against Jordan Hicks with the first inning home run by Paul Goldschmidt, and you were able to factor in some walks there as well. Could have been even worse than it was in that first inning with a wild pitch there involved. He was allowing stolen bases. Like, it was just completely going off the rails for Jordan Hicks at the very beginning. So it feels like he was on his heels a bit, and the Cardinals were able to capitalize. And that was even true in the innings where Hicks didn't allow any runs. Like, the second inning was pretty nondescript because he was able to erase the only hit that he allowed on a double play. But then it took a great diving catch by Elliot Ramos in order to rob Michael Ciani to end that inning. So still could have been worse in terms of the damage there. And then the third inning didn't allow any runs, but walked Burleson. Burleson stole second base. That's when they hit Gorman, walked Arenado, and was able to get out of the jam on a Brendan Donovan flyout. But that was an inning where that might have arguably been his worst inning in terms of just allowing guys to roam freely onto the base paths, but was able to find a way out of it. Didn't end up having to pay for any of those mistakes. But then it was a 2-out rally in the fourth. The Cardinals seemingly were going to go quietly, but then you get a Dylan Carlson knock, Mason Wynn doubles, and Alec Burleson was the one to make him pay, Jordan Hicks pay, with the first of 2 homers that he hits on the game, a 3-run shot. So it was kind of interesting the way that Hicks outing went. They did not bring him back out for the 5th inning, did the Giants, 88 pitches, and they had seen enough. Very good job, honestly, by the St. Louis Cardinal offense. And I don't know how many times we've said that this season, but to have an approach against Jordan Hicks and the familiarity, I think, honestly played to the Cardinals' benefit in this matchup. I don't know why it feels like that happens instead of the way that it went with Jack Flaherty, where his familiarity with the hitters almost played to his advantage, it felt like, because he knew how to pitch guys. Whereas with Hicks, it seems like the Cardinals knew, hey, we love Jordan Hicks, right? He was our teammate last year, but now he's on the other side. How do we approach him, make him throw pitches, make him make mistakes to us, and he's going to if we give him a long enough leash to do that, rather than do his job for him by chasing those sliders out of the zone and swinging at those fastballs and the sinkers where he can try to dot you up. Make him do it, basically. Make him dot you up and don't give him anything for free. And the Cardinals did a nice job of that. Like, the third inning, I think, played critically in this ball game for the Cardinals, because even though they didn't score any runs, the fact that they were making Jordan Hicks work out there and think about things ultimately, I think, helped chase him from this game a little bit earlier than otherwise would have been the case. The fact that he was giving up some stolen bases and was walking guys, like, that's a concerted effort, is what that tells me from the Cardinals, to be able to force Jordan Hicks out of his comfort zone, right? There's a lot of familiarity there with his game and what that would look like. So for the Cardinals to be able to execute that in the way that they did, I think was really particularly impressive. And kind of interesting, too, to look at the StatCast on this game. We know that Jordan Hicks has been dialing it back a little bit as a starter this season because obviously it's just not very sustainable to throw 101, 105 throughout a 5 or 6 inning starter role compared to what you do in the bullpen. So I think that's been something the Giants have been totally okay with, saying, look, you're not going to be lighting up the radar in the same way, but you could be a starter. Here's how you can do it effectively. But it's just a little bit different to see Jordan Hicks sitting 94, 95 instead of what he normally would do at the Cardinals. He hit 96 at one point in the Brendan Donovan at bat in the third inning, and that was with a four-seamer. The sinker is the one that used to, he used to run up triple digits with regularity, and we just didn't see anything close to that from Jordan Hicks today. But that's been pretty normal from what I understand of his season. He was around 95 for the most part. Kind of crazy to have a game where Jordan Hicks throws as many pitches as he does. And the top 4 pitch velocities in the game came from Kyle Leahy, who got it up to 97 a couple of times, and Ryan Fernandez at 96.6 was number 5 on the board. So not even anywhere to be found on the leaderboard is just a sign of the times. But that's also what they've been trying to do with Jordan Hicks. They don't mind that he hasn't been throwing it as hard this year in the role that he's in, trying to conserve some energy. And it largely has worked out. Even after today's game, which was a bad one for Hicks, he's got a 3.24 ERA on the season. That's better than most Cardinals starters right now. So you certainly will take that. But the Cardinals got the better of him, and I think it was all about their plate approach, to be able to know a lot about the arsenal that Hicks has, to be able to lay off some of the pitches that he would try to get you to chase on, and to force him into throwing more pitches, working harder out there. And clearly, I think the Cardinals were also able to identify and exploit at least a little bit a tell there in terms of Jordan Hicks and his ability to hold on base runners, as both Nolan Gorman and Alec Burleson, 2 guys that you don't normally think of as base stealers, were able to steal off of Hicks this afternoon. But beyond the Jordan Hicks angle of it all, the Cardinal offense, plate approach-wise, not only against the starter, but against the bullpen as well, had a very nice showing. And as I mentioned, just nice that it coincides with the pitching staff doing its job. So you have a 5-run lead in the 8th and 9th inning. They still end up sticking with Ryan Fernandez for that 8th inning because he recorded the final out of the 7th at the time when Jojo Romero recorded a couple of outs to get the Cardinals through part of that 7th inning. The lead was not 5 runs. It was only 3 runs there in the top of the 7th. And then the bottom half of the 7th is when the Cardinals added on with a Brendan Donovan home run and then a 2-out rally from the bottom of the batting order, able to get another run across there as well. Nice day for Dylan Carlson, who was a part of that. He came off the bench for Michael Ciani, who left with an injury. The X-rays came back clean on Ciani. That's one of the quick injury notes I can just get out of the way. Ciani should be okay, it seems like, maybe just a day-to-day sort of situation. But Dylan came off the bench and ended up filling in very nicely, had a base hit as part of that rally, and also scored a run in this game, going 2 for 3. Batting average still sub 200 for Dylan at 183. OPS at 473, but he's slowly but surely making his way back toward respectability. Cardinals just need a little bit more thump from the bottom of that lineup. Guys like Ciani, guys like Carlson, and obviously Pedro Pages is in that mix as well. Other than the Wrigley series, hasn't really brought a lot to the plate, but he's done a nice job behind the plate, and that's about all you can ask for with Wilson Contreras. Should be back any minute now, perhaps as early as Sunday. We'll see. Maybe by the time you're listening to this, we've already got news on Contreras. Although the Cardinals did have to make a roster move for a catcher Saturday, which makes you think, man, you really wish Wilson would have just been a little bit further along in his progress. But I guess Nick Raposo does not wish for that because he ended up getting the call. Cardinals had to select his contract and put him on the 40-man, which is maybe a little bit of a dicey thing because once Wilson comes back, you'll have 4 healthy catchers on the 40-man roster, and obviously not a lot of use for 4 catchers. But Raposo, you do have to have down in Memphis to be able to hold down the fort there. So we'll see what ends up happening. Hopefully, just not a real concern. I think the Cardinals even had an extra spot on the 40-man available for the time being. So hopefully not a huge squeeze there. But in the offseason, at a minimum, or maybe around the trade deadline, you'll have to start to think about 40-man spots. And Raposo was not on, but now he is because they needed him for basically today and perhaps Sunday as well, unless Wilson is able to rejoin the club. But would probably make the most sense for Wilson to get one more day in Memphis. He caught into the seventh inning today, and there was actually a collision play at the plate in the seventh and final inning that he was scheduled to catch. At least that's what they said on the Memphis broadcast. I guess I'd have to go back and look to make sure that Wilson did ultimately leave the game after the seventh. But the play at the plate was Alfonso Rivas getting the ball at first and firing home to Contreras. Bang, bang, with the same time the runner arrived at home, did the baseball from Rivas to Wilson. And he was not able to hold on to that baseball, but there was a collision with the runner, and Wilson's left catching arm, the glove arm, the same arm that was obviously broken, fractured by the J.D. Martinez swing back in early May. So that was a little bit dicey for Wilson. The trainer came out to check on him. Ben Johnson, the manager, came out to check on as well. But Wilson stayed in the game for the rest of that seventh inning, which is a good sign. It would have been a little bit confusing if he would have come out because we might not have known the severity of the injury because he was only supposed to catch the first 7 innings anyway. But it was good that he was at least able to finish the rest of that inning before Gavin Collins, who is a AAA player with the Cardinals that I guess he's a part-time catcher, full-time catcher. I don't really know. He's been a full-time catcher this year, but plays some third base as well throughout his career. But anyway, Wilson Contreras, maybe he'll be back sooner than later. Had a near miss down there in AAA, but ultimately came back into the game or stayed in the game rather, and should be fine. But anyway, that's just some housekeeping stuff on Nick Raposo, called up to the Cardinals because of the Ivan Herrera injury. Herrera did go on the injured list with that injury that we found out about on Thursday at Rickwood Field. He was not available for that game, and so the Cardinals, to have some reinforcements until Contreras gets back, they end up calling up and selecting the contract of another catcher, Nick Raposo. And now you figure that'll mean no question for Pedro Pages' roster spot when Wilson returns. That's going to be the tandem, and I think it'll be interesting to see how often Wilson is the DH, where Pages continues to get some run behind the plate. I think that will be the case to some extent because of the nice job that Pages has done. The Cardinals might want to ease Contreras back in behind the plate. He'll say, no, I want to catch as often as they'll let me because he's a gamer and a warrior out there. But I do think because of how good of a job Pedro Pages has done behind the plate specifically, knowing that they'll be able to keep Contreras' bat in the lineup rather easily by DHing him, I think that'll be interesting to see if Pages continues to split some of the time behind the plate when Wilson does return, which should be sooner rather than later. Elsewhere on the injury front, Giovanni Gallegos is, of course, back with the Cardinals. That move was announced on Friday. They did send Adam Kloffenstein back to AAA, and he'll probably stay in that rotation, even though he did a nice job on Thursday. I think the role is still for him to be part of the organizational starting pitching depth, especially after the Steven Matz news that came down on Saturday. So I don't think that's necessarily too surprising to see. We sort of talked about how that was likely going to be the case. It just stinks because the guy had his big league debut and then gets sent down without even spending a day at Busch Stadium, right? Like he's back to the minors and only ever had played in a minor league stadium essentially at Rickwood Field. So hopefully, you get another chance to see Adam Kloffenstein and he's able to have that moment at Busch Stadium. Not that it wasn't really cool for him there at Rickwood, but that's another one of those deals that's just kind of a quirk of the season and of the way things are right now for the Cardinals. But Gallegos was brought in. He did not come into the game on Saturday. 5-run lead. If it had been, I think, that way a little earlier in the game, maybe you would have seen Gallegos come in. But Fernandez had only thrown to one batter in the 7th, and I figure that maybe the Cardinals knew, hey, once he's in the game, we might as well use him for the 8th because whatever our plan is for him, he'll be unavailable Saturday as it is. Because he only recorded one out there in the 7th inning, getting out of the remainder of that inning, maybe that was the consideration, even though the lead had expanded to 5. Fernandez gets the 8th, and Kyle Leahy gets the 9th. So you're able to save some of the bullpen guys, but it would have been nice to see if they could have scored enough to get Gallegos into the game to where people would have felt safe about it, because you'd like to know sooner rather than later. Chris Roycroft, of course, was sent down on Thursday for Kloffenstein, and he threw 2 scoreless innings tonight for Memphis. And elsewhere, too, because I was locked in a little bit more on the Memphis game than I normally might be because of the Contreras situation, which he didn't do anything at the plate. He really hasn't done a ton in his rehab in terms of offensively, just hitting 125. But I don't really think you worry too much about that. In terms of the numbers for Contreras offensively right now, it's just about getting him back into the swing of things, and I would not hesitate to call him in. It'll be interesting to see though when they do decide to get him in there. But the other guy that pitched tonight was Packy Naughton. He's at AAA, still trying to kind of work his way back. And I think any moment the Cardinals might need a lefty out of their bullpen. It doesn't seem like right now they really will because there are plenty of guys out there doing it. And maybe long term, Steven Matz is another one that may not be someone they should consider for a rotation spot again. Maybe he should be kind of relegated to bullpen duties in the future. I'm not sure how that's going to affect Packy Naughton, but he pitched in Memphis today as well and has a 4.5 ERA down there. Elsewhere, though, on the injury front, we want to get into the Nolan Arenado situation because there was some confusion post-game about his injury, as Ollie Marmol, I think, at the podium post-game said it was the right arm for him, right forearm, but it actually was left. But he had said he had not actually spoken with Arenado at that point. He was in the trainer's room, so he didn't really have a great feel for it. And so the Cardinal reporters there that are at Busch clarified later on that it was indeed that left forearm, and it's unrelated to what he was hit in the right elbow before the game at Rickwood. That was, I think, Wednesday. He took that ball off the elbow in Miami off the right arm, and now this one was the left, and it was a little more concerning because it wasn't a hit by pitch. I don't believe that had anything to do with this one. It looked like he kind of on an awkward swing kind of jammed himself a little bit on the left arm, and for that to end up bringing him out of the game is a little bit of a concern. Weak grounder to the left side of the infield was what it was for Arenado, so we'll wait and see. Was maybe something to track as it relates to back to talking about the Memphis Redbirds. There was no Thomas Saggese in the Cardinal or in the Memphis lineup rather down in AAA, and Cesar Prieto was also not in the starting lineup, but he did pinch run later in that game for Memphis. So Saggese would be an interesting one. Could obviously play third base, but you know what? Like Brendan Donovan could play third base as well, and it's the case that Jordan Walker has kind of been heating up at Memphis. Not today, didn't do much today for the Redbirds, but Saggese doesn't have great numbers this season. 235 average and a 686 OPS coming into play today, and obviously didn't play for AAA as I mentioned. So I don't know if the Cardinals would be thinking about calling him up. He really has kind of taken a cool down since elevating to AAA. Had such great numbers at AA last year between both Frisco and Springfield after the Cardinals traded for him at the deadline. But then when the Cardinals called him up to Memphis late last year, he didn't really do a ton. And then so far this season has not had a ton of success. But if you're thinking, okay, Arenado's going to be out for a little bit, who do you go to? I mean, maybe there's something to that, but I'm not 100% sure that the Cardinals would be looking to call up Saggese based on the 686 OPS that he has so far this year in AAA, but you never do know. It's just something to keep an eye on. If they do end up seeing Arenado go down, filling out that third base could be a combination of Donovan, who is often needed in the outfield, but he could play there, obviously. I don't know how willing they would be to have Nolan Gorman shift over to third. He has not done it, I don't believe, this season. Has just primarily been a second baseman. I feel like did it a little bit last year, but with the state of the roster this year for the Cardinals, I think it's been their preference to just kind of leave him at second and not throw too much at him. Last year he did, though. He played 18 games total at third, and 12 of those games were started at third base by Nolan Gorman. Has not done it once this year. So that seems to be a pretty concerted effort and a difference by the Cardinals from what we had seen last year, where he was maybe one of the viable backup third basemen on the team. Now, everyday second baseman really able to settle into his role has seemingly been the preference. But Brandon Crawford, as we saw on Thursday at Rickwood, they're willing to have him play third. Jose Fermin obviously can do it, but I don't think either of those guys really profile bat-wise as somebody that you'd want to play extended time in your lineup at third, which is why, to me, the thing that would make the most sense would be if you do need to put Arenado on the IL, to call up Jordan Walker, have him play the outfield, and shift Brendan Donovan to the infield more of a full-time basis there. But, maybe they're still waiting to see more from Walker. As I mentioned, he didn't do anything tonight. I think he went over in that game with Memphis, but hit a big long home run yesterday or Thursday, I believe it was. So, it's dealer's choice on that one, but he's a 723 OPS in AAA. Not really yet the consistency of the power that you want to see from Jordan Walker, but I think positionally it would make sense for the Cardinals to call him up if there is a need with Arenado. Hopefully it's not that long term for Arenado to where they would have to go the injured list route, but that's just something to keep an eye on and to keep your attention trained on, just in case there is anything that comes up with that. Don't be surprised by it, I guess is what I would say. By the way, just a lot of this is kind of housekeeping for today because there is a lot to get to and we didn't podcast on Friday. But Keenan Middleton was the move to get Nick Raposo on the roster. I think I forgot to mention that. If you're wondering, the 40-man spot, they 60-day IL Keenan Middleton, who had season-ending surgery, so he's not going to be a factor in the season anyway, which is why the Cardinals were able to make that decision with him. What I do want to mention as it pertains to Steven Matz, and I'll get you this. I think I saw Katie Wu had tweeted about it. So there was some injury updates to get to as we talked about. But Steven Matz, I'll just read this from Katie's feed. Obviously, Cardinal beat writer for The Athletic and contributor to First Alert 4 as well, by the way, teammate at KMOV. Steven Matz woke up with tightness after his most recent rehab start. The Cardinals are looking at a best-case scenario of 4 to 6 weeks. Palante will continue in the 5-starter spot. Obviously, the Cardinals have a deadline decision to make, says Katie at the end there. So 4 to 6 weeks for Steven Matz. Look, here's my take on Matz at this point. If he would have been able to come back and rejoin the team now, you probably slide him in there for Palante, even though Palante, I think, has done a serviceable job in the number 5 starter role, which is really all you can ask for from that spot. But for me at this point, I think Matz has to be done being considered by the Cardinals internally for the rotation, if this organization is serious about getting its rotation in order, right? There can be a bullpen spot waiting for him when he returns, but the notion of counting on him, I think, would kind of be malpractice at this point. I'm including post-trade deadline this year and next year as well in that, because he does have a contract that runs through 2025. I'm officially on watch for adding his spot to the list of rotation needs for next year. Like mentally, I go, okay, are they really going to pick up the Lance Lynn option? Maybe not. Well, add Steven Matz to that, in my opinion, where you just need to count that as a spot it's not accounted for at this point. He's your number 6 or an expensive reliever next year. When you're thinking about the mental calculus of it all and these roster decisions, it would just be bad form to count on him for next year in the plans among the starting 5. Frankly, you could make the case that it was already bad form to do so this year, but I understood why they did it, because you were paying him anyway, and you had 3 other spots you had to fill. You did that successfully. They just, maybe the 4 spots of turnover, which is not an excuse, but it might have been a lot to do in one off season. Clearly, they could have done it, though, because they had the first 3 done. If they would have just pretended like, hey, we need one more, you go sign Shota Imanaga, wrestle him away from the Cubs. Not saying it would have been easy. Maybe he wanted to go to Chicago, but let's be honest, it took till January to sign him, and you could have offered a lot more money, just being honest with you. But I think at this point, you just sort of have to say 3 years in a row of this where you just haven't been able to rely on Matz doesn't make him a bad guy. I think he's actually a great guy and a pretty good pitcher when he's healthy, but he's very rarely healthy. This is the 3rd year in a row where it just hasn't worked out physically. So I think you have to cut your losses a little bit mentally. That's not saying DFA. I'm not saying you just get rid of him for nothing. But you understand that you're going to be overpaying for whatever his value is to the roster next year. This setback, the 4 to 6 more weeks before we really know if we're going to see him or not, that's kind of the final straw for me. It's a deal where if you can maybe trade him away next year, give away a prospect as well, ranked in like the 20 to 25 to 30 in your organizational prospect rankings. I'm saying basically add a prospect to get rid of Matz essentially for nothing back. If the other team will eat some or most of the money, I think you probably do that at this point. And just, if you can get rid of, he's owed like 11 million or whatever it is. If you can get rid of 5 or 6 or 7 million of that, and somebody else will take it on to say, hey, he'll be our number 5. We're going to try to do this on the cheap and maybe take a guy with an upside arm if he can happen to stay healthy. I think you let that team take him on and you go out and fill the spot in a different way. It's unfortunate because I think Matz does have good stuff when he's right. It's just kind of getting to be a deterrent and a detriment to the organization to not be able to know exactly what you're doing with that spot year to year, month to month, week to week. I mean, how much of an issue has that number 5 spot been this year? Credit to Palante for what he did on Thursday, but the consistency of it, we're still kind of waiting to see if he can hack it in that role. But before that, it was Liberatore. Before that, it was Zach Thompson. They've just really had a hard time finding depth guys that can fill in. And when your plan is, well, our depth guys don't matter quite as much because we believe we have 5 starters that can take the ball 30 times, like that was Mo's entire argument. Well, Steven Matz is not among those characteristics. I think the other guys, Sonny Gray, Lance Lynn, Kyle Gibson, Miles Michaelis, largely that's the case for them most years. They do have a relatively, knock on wood, durable group. Matz is not among that. And so that's where, because Matz was included in that 5, you maybe would have liked to have seen them get another piece that could have slid into this role that has since been vacated by Matz. But yep, that's the word from Katie Wu, from Cardinal Reporters. They all had it this afternoon at Busch. It's a setback. If it's best case scenario of 4 to 6 weeks after he felt some tightness following a rehab start, I mean, it's late June now. You're basically talking about post deadline before the Cardinals really are going to have any hope to see Steven Matz again. Like they've labeled that as the best case scenario, 4 to 6 weeks. You're talking about late July, early August. You basically have to pretend he's not even there. Pretend he doesn't exist when you walk into that deadline in late July. You cannot say, well, I don't know if we want to use assets to trade for a starter, because what about when Steven Matz comes back? Well, where would we put him? That's complicated. Nope. That just cannot be the Cardinals and John Mozeliak's mentality. And I don't think it will be. Frankly, I think they understand at this point internally that they're about at the end of at their wits' end when it comes to Steven Matz. Again, not a bad guy, but that's frustrating when you sign a guy for 4 years, and 3 of those first 4 years, it's just completely been a lack of reliability in terms of the durability and being able to get him on the field. So I think that's the end of the injury updates as I have it. There was maybe one other thing. Riley O'Brien, I think, also had a setback as well, to where I'm not 100% sure that we're going to see him. His forearm was not feeling right. This is per Katie Wu. So rehab was paused. Imaging came back clear, but the team will still seek a second opinion. I think it's probably to the point where we just would say Riley probably not going to be a thing this year. Again, anything you get from him is a bonus sort of mentality, because it's along the same line with what happened with Keenan Middleton, where he was ready to go, he was rehabbing, and then had to stop. That's never a good sign when you are ramped up and then almost immediately not feeling right. And he had asked for an extra day or two anyway, after a bullpen before getting into game action. And that was maybe one of those things that was said when really they knew it was never going to happen anyway. But they just said, oh, he wanted an extra day. Yeah, I just think that's probably trending in the wrong direction too. So basically, John Mozeliak has his work cut out at the deadline. He needs to be adding to this pitching staff, I think, in a few different regards. If this Cardinal team is really going to be serious about not only getting to the playoffs, because you might be able to do that with 81, 82, 83 wins. Who knows? The wild card situation is a mess. I still maintain that those wild card teams are all going to have winning records. And that's actually the case as of today. The Padres have gone on a run of 4 straight, so they're a game above 500. The Cardinals are as well after their 2 wins over the Giants. Everybody else in the mix is slightly below 500, but they're all within 3 games or so of the Cardinals and of the Padres. So you're going to have to win 83, 84 games, at least in my opinion, to get an NL wild card. May not look that way now, but that's going to be the case. The teams that are serious about it are going to pursue it at the deadline. They're going to get what they need to fix some of the holes on their rosters, and those are going to be the teams that have success, in my opinion. So the Cardinals and John Mozeliak knows this, they need to be among those teams that are actively pursuing improvements to the team. And for me, it's on the pitching side for the Cardinals. The 9 runs that happened on Saturday, great to see. Goldie homering. I mean, he's up to 10 homers now. That's double digits. Really on pace for 22, 23, 24. That you feel pretty good about that, right? Like compared to where he had been, I think that's encouraging. You'd certainly like to see better in terms of his OPS and the consistency of his numbers, but at least he's coming up with more of those homers lately to feel like, okay, you can have a guy like that closer to the middle of your lineup. Maybe not ideally number 3, but again, we've talked a lot about how there's just not a lot of guys at the bottom of the order that you can make a compelling argument to move up. the guys performing well are Alec Burleson. He's already batting second. Guys like Brendan Donovan, he's already there, usually in that number 5 spot. He'll bat leadoff from time to time if Mason Wynn is out of a game. But generally, it's nice to see Goldie contributing in that way. And Donovan, by the way, had another nice game today. He just can turn on that ball and nuke it to right field. I still don't buy into the StatCast 380 feet that they said for his homer at Rickwood. I think they basically didn't have the StatCast data going very accurately early on. So I truly don't know in that game on Thursday how they came up with the distance on that for Donovan's. I'm going to call BS and take the over for sure. But he had another one today that got out. Burleson does a nice job of turning on those inside pitches, and he had one that went to center and one that he just nuked out to right field. I think landed in the bullpen. Cardinals 2 for 7 with RISP today. Continue to talk about that being a thing. That's fine. Like when you're hitting home runs and you're coming up with a couple of timely hits. I believe the Burleson, obviously the 3-run homer that he hit was a hit with RISP. So to be able to capitalize and cash in that way is good. But offensively for the Cardinals to score in a number of ways, to do it both against the starter Hicks and against the bullpen too, and see some of these guys really settling into their power swing. Donovan now with 8 homers. Like he's on pace for 16, 17, 18, maybe 20 home runs if he's able to continue the way that we've seen him go on a torrid pace in recent weeks. So the fact that the Cardinals are hitting for power, but they're also coming up with a few of those timely hits as well, you feel good about the offense. You just feel good about a team above 500. Now it's going to be a question with all the injuries that are going on, and that's still something that you got to keep in mind and think about. Maybe Tommy Edman and Lars Nootbaar getting a little bit closer to rehab assignments as Edman has been ramping up down in Florida. Nootbaar taking full swings is close to being ready for BP. Katie Woo's Twitter feed as well with that. So if the Cardinals can get both those guys back before even the All-Star break, that's a few weeks away yet, but that would feel like a pretty encouraging thing, I think, if the Cardinals would be able to make that happen, and really your lineup looks differently at that point to where you don't really think about needing to make trades for offense. I mean, positionally, you could still maybe look for that right-handed hitting outfielder, but I don't even necessarily think there's going to be a lot of room for that when the time comes. Again, as we talked about at the beginning, Alec Burleson, there was really no spot for him if everybody was healthy coming out of spring. Obviously, there were plenty of injuries that happened in spring, and so that didn't end up being an issue. But now my point is when everybody comes back healthy, you're not going to be looking to say, oh, Alec Burleson, you got to go back down. No, he's one of the Cardinals' most productive hitters. And not only is he going to have a roster spot, he's going to be in the everyday lineup. And so what that means for guys like Siani, Carlson, even Lars Nootbaar when he comes back, Tommy Edman when he comes back, like you're now entering into a new world order where Alec Burleson is one of the dudes on this Cardinal team. And he's pacing 25 and maybe even could push for 30 home runs with the way that he has been able to get that power swing going. So feel good about the offense, feel pretty good about the pitching, the way that you got it on Saturday. And then it's, of course, going to be Sonny Gray going on Sunday. So let me know in the comments, folks, how you're feeling about this Cardinals team as they wrestle back to a slight position above 500 with the win on Saturday, going for the sweep on Sunday at Busch Stadium. That's going to do it for this edition of the show. Appreciate you guys, as always, for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.